So, what we're going to talk about today is taking time after a breakup. But I just thought about this today because one of my students on the Gauntlet program reached out to me and, on the program and said, hey, I've just gone through a breakup and I don't know how to work through this process. And now I really need to find myself before I move into dating someone else again. And this is really, really important. It's something that I think is tremendously relevant for us as human beings in terms of finding a better, more evolved relationship as you move forward. It's not just to grieve. That's one aspect of it. Sometimes in a breakup, it may seem like you're not the only person who wanted, or you are the only person possibly who wanted to end the relationship and move into the next stage. This relationship wasn't necessarily working out for you. On the contrary, maybe the other person broke up with you and now you're left on the back end thinking, okay, what did I do? Why am I in this situation? Why is this not really working out? And the thing that we want to do as human beings is we want to jump into the next thing really, really quick. And the reason that we want to do that is because that is what takes away from the grieving that we're feeling. And when I say take away from it, it actually takes away from, it actually distracts us in many ways from actually being able to process why that relationship wasn't necessarily the best thing for us. So something, I know well from experience in this particular situation, in this particular place, is that I used to be like a serial dater. As soon as I ended up in one relationship, I would jump into the next one. As soon as, I broke up with somebody or somebody broke up with me, I'd look for the next thing, right? And that helps you feel like you're connected to someone else physically, emotionally. It makes you feel distracted by something else so that you don't have to process the feelings of a broken heart. And I've said this twice in this last week. But a broken heart is one of the most important things that you could have at the end of a relationship, as difficult as it sounds, because the pain and the difficulty you're going through are such powerful reflectors for what it is that's really important to you, what it is that really matters to you, and what it is that you really want. One of the most magical things about breakups, and one of the most difficult things about it, is losing the person, losing the relationship. Now, as human beings, we have this thought that when we break up and this person is lost, that we've lost everything. And it's because, and this is what I'm going to tell you, and it's really potent, so listen carefully to this. We have identified, visualized, and imagined our lives together with this person. We've visualized our futures with this person. We visualized all the magic of things we could achieve or could have, or the life we could enjoy with them. And also, while doing that, we're using our present recollection of the times that we've had with them. So based on how we've connected with them, enjoyed our time, the feelings, etc., we're replicating the future. But if you think really carefully, it's not actually the person who's at the center of that replication. It's the times, it's the emotions, it's what you want that you're visualizing, and that person happens to be a really good fit into that space. I'm going to repeat that again. So it's what you want for your future, what you're visualizing, the things that you are grieving when you end that relationship. Those are the times, the emotions, the way you felt, the things you enjoyed, the times you had together, the celebrations, possibly even the extension of their family, etc. But all of those things can be reproduced. The person cannot be reproduced. But the magic is that it's not the person you're actually grieving. It's the things associated with the person. Now, why this is really important is because at the end of a relationship, naturally, grief makes us feel the loss of something, right? It's very important to grieve because then you're accepting the loss of what you let go of what you've, of what's gone in your past. If it was so true that the person we lost was the be-all and end-all of everything that we've ever had, then wouldn't all of us not be in any relationships? Because if we had one relationship that didn't work out way back when, we would never be able to move past it. We'd never be able to connect with anybody else. We'd never be able to move forward. We'd never be able to find the next partner. And inevitably, you know what we always say? After a couple of weeks, months, whatever else, we find the next partner and we go like, oh my God, this is the person who I really wanted. This is the person who I really wanted to be with. I wrote about, I connected with, all of those things. And it's almost like we've completely forgotten that the previous person was the one that we were so attached to. So what we're actually attached to, our inner child wants to be attached to the emotions, the connection, the love, the validation, the romance, the traveling, the journeys, all of that. The ego wants to be attached to the person. And there's a big difference between the two. Because by the ego attaching to the person, it makes us feel like we just can't move on. So if we understood that what we're really attaching to is the emotions, the feeling, the energy, the time, the feeling of family, all of the things that that person represents, then we understand that one of them is not reproducible, which is the person. I can't make the exact version of him again, but or her again, but what I can most definitely make is the times, the emotions, the situation. I can attract all of those things into my life again. And that is what ultimately leads to the next question. Okay, so now what is it that I must do for myself to be able to attract a more consistent, more stable, more steady, more loving, more fulfilling, more giving, more replicatable version of those emotions? And that's ultimately what leads us to evolve. That's ultimately what gets us to say, okay, what is it that I attracted in that particular time? Who's the partner that I brought in, the situation that I brought in, etc. And now what is it that I can attract that's going to be able to serve me moving forward? So after a breakup, it is very important to spend time with yourself. It's very important to sit back, to be able to feel the pain, not to just drown it out, not to just ignore it, not to just say, okay, what's coming next? Let me go distract myself. Let me go travel. Let me do anything. If you're doing any of those are important and those are good for you. If you're traveling, you're getting stimulation, but don't let the stimulation distract you from the lessons. Because relationships, and I've always said this to people, relationships are the number one way that our own personality, our own traits, our own wounds, and our own growth are reflected back to us. So if you look at your relationship, case in point, let's take an example, your previous relationship, right? Just sit with all of you, just sit with yourself and think about your previous relationship. Maybe even you can think of the present one, but think about the previous one, right? Your previous relationship, you attracted that person into your life, right? You went through something with them, you felt really connected with them, etc., but it didn't work out. Now, if you think back to who were you when you attracted that person, you're almost able to say, wow, I was this individual who attracted that individual. So already that's one reflection that you're able to get, that, okay, the relationship came in and the relationship was a certain kind of way because I was a certain kind of way. Next question. What were our interactions like? What were our discussions like? How did we challenge each other? Now, in a lot of cases, if you're able to identify and say, okay, my partner is someone who has they were very withdrawn. They were someone who was like very isolated. They didn't really talk to me. They didn't really emotionally connect with me. Then you're able to reflect on two things. One is you say, okay, then that means those things are important for me. Because if they weren't important, you would have just let them go, right? You wouldn't even have noticed that they're not available for you emotionally. But you notice they're not available for you emotionally because that's what's important to you, being emotionally available. So that's already two reflections. Now, you can break down that question into a further, deeper inner work question, which is then, why did I attract someone like that into my life? That's also a really good reflection after breakup. And the reason that happens is if something that we want or desire inside is not being met internally. So if the inner child's needs are not being met internally, the ego tries to create a dependency externally. You see, so if the inner child wants like love, validation, connection, and the inner child is the little being inside you that lives from like when you were really small through your conditioning, through all the wounds that you went through, the inner child had those basic needs of love, connection, attention, support. And if their needs, even now as an adult within you, are not being met, the ego now tries to attract someone who replicates very much what your parents, your caregivers, etc. did, so that it can try and depend on them to give it to you. But the conundrum here and the irony is such that whoever you attract will represent the same kind of person from your childhood who didn't give it to you. Do you know why that is? Think about it for a second. Whoever I attract in my life, if I'm really seeking those things externally, whoever I attract will represent the same type of energy or personality as the person in my childhood who didn't give it to me. You know why that is? It's because that is a way that your internal system is trying to remind you that you need to do that healing yourself. You need to be able to provide it yourself. And until you wake up and realize that, I'm going to keep attracting people who reject you, who kind of break up with you, who don't possibly give you that kind of emotional validation and affection that you're yearning for so much. So that's why this time after you break up becomes so important, because then you say, okay, I don't want to attract that kind of person in my life again who emotionally invalidates me. I don't want to attract that kind of person in my life again who's not present for me. So what is my need right now? My need is that I need to feel loved. I need to feel fulfilled. I need to feel connection. So let me take this time while I'm single to be able to give it to myself more and more. When you start doing that for yourself, the first thing that you do is you start committing to acts or things that you really enjoy doing. So cooking with affection and love, and not just cooking to eat. Going for really long walks with yourself and just talking to yourself, enjoying yourself. Celebrating yourself is a really big one. Celebrating your small wins, your big wins. Connecting with people who value you and not people whose attention you necessarily need. All of these things now show your inner child that you are willing to show up for them. That they can now create a dependency on you so that you don't need to create that dependency on the external. You see? Because now you are meeting the needs of the inner child, so therefore you don't need to get those needs met by somebody externally. So therefore you're not going to attach yourself to someone externally. So now what happens is you attract someone into your life who, in two ways. One, not only are you not depending on them like excessively for them to validate you, give you those needs, make you feel important, validate your emotions, make you feel like you are the most important thing in the world. So not only are you not depending on them to do it, it's nice that you ask them and they may give it to you, from time to time, but you're not depending on it. And two, they're not under the pressure to be able to give it to you either. And so you start attracting someone who's more capable to give it to you out of freedom rather than feel that you depend on me for this, so therefore I must give it to you. And that's ultimately how we reach more security within our own relationships. And that's why, again, coming back to that point, that taking the time off between relationships becomes really important, where we can assess and we can evaluate for ourselves, what did that previous relationship teach me? One of the biggest things that I could tell you about that time after a breakup, before you get into the next relationship, one of the most important things that you can do in that space is to discover your patterns. I had someone reach out to me recently, and they were texting me and they were asking me, this was actually a friend of mine who was reaching out for just some help, just some connection. And they were talking about connecting with women, and they reminded me of a pattern that I had, which is where when I was with someone for a long period of time, I would attract a woman who, this was in my past, by the way, I would attract someone into my life who wouldn't challenge me necessarily emotionally, and who just basically accept all of what I was like offering them. And this is not necessarily in a good way. They would accept all of my bullshit. And the reason that I attracted these kind of people was so that I could step into a place where I could get away with a lot of bullshit, and they would just say, oh, this is what he does, this is who he is, we'll accept this relationship. And my pattern in that relationship was then, if I wasn't feeling emotionally validated naturally, because I wasn't feeling really challenged by this person, I wasn't feeling really connected to this person, which is why obviously I settled and she settled, but I would constantly try and get this externally with other people. And I'd constantly try and like attract someone else into my life. And whenever I was going to a bar, if I was with my friends, instantly I'd seek connection. If I was going out and I was at the airport and like my eyes met another person, instantly I'd go out and I'd seek it. And so for me, when I ended this relationship, what was really helpful was to see, am I still attempting to seek those same things? Am I still attempting to attract those same things? And I was. I really was. And so when I got into a relationship with the next person, I noticed like in the beginning, it's all like, fireworks, it's great, you feel like all of this connection. And then later on, I started noticing that, okay, I'm finding this person appealing, I'm finding this person appealing, and I'm wanting to go out and make connection with them. That says two things for me in that moment. It says that perhaps I'm not feeling like there's a strong enough connection in my relationship right now, and I've attracted it just for a feeling of safety, just so I can feel like, okay, I am not alone, just so I can be with someone, but the connection is not potent enough, which is making me want these things. So that's part one. And part two, it's telling me that I have an excessive need of validation from people externally, that clearly I'm not giving it to myself. And no person actually that I can be with can give me that level of validation, because the first person whose validation and sense of security I need is my own. And so what's going to happen in that situation, let me tell you, this is how narcissism is born, right? I was a narcissist for sure, and so that was exhibiting that trait of it. But this is how narcissism comes to being, is that you need such a strong sense of external validation and approval, so much so that you're willing to emotionally manipulate people all around you to be able to get it. And it's because your sense of security in that position or in that place or internally is so low that you need to falsely depict the sense of confidence, the sense of charm, the sense of like flirtatiousness, all of that, because that is what makes you feel more valid as a person. Again, I track this back to the time after a breakup, because if you don't take this time after a breakup to discover these things about yourselves, then you just slip into the next relationship with the same pattern. You attract a very similar person, maybe a little more evolved, maybe a little more receded, depending on how you're moving in your inner workspace. But you attract the same type of relationship and it leads to the same type of result. So for me, the biggest and one of the greatest gifts, I tell my students on the Gauntlet class, the greatest gift I've ever had was that I was with this girl for 6 years, the same girl who I felt very deeply for, but obviously I did all kinds of bullshit in that period of time that I definitely know how much I put upon her by doing that. And the greatest thing is that in this relationship, I was the dominant individual who kept deciding and dictating how the relationship would go. And the one decision she really made was the relationship right at the end, to end the relationship. And that was the best decision she could have made for her and for me, because that allowed her to be able to recognize for herself, like, what the fuck did I attract into my life? And it allowed me, when I was on my ass at that moment, to be like, what the fuck did I just do? And I spent that whole period of time after that relationship in so much pain, but introspecting, why the hell would I do that? Like, why would I want to say I'm with someone and then try and like physically connect with everybody else around? That just doesn't make sense. Why would I not only want to put someone else through that? Why would I want to put myself through it? Through all the guilt, the shame, all the negative emotions that I don't really need to hold on to that are plaguing me. Why would I want to go through that extent of doing that? And that's what allowed me to dig in and say, it's not just because I'm a sex addict, which is, honestly, a lot of people have asked me about this, but sex addiction is just a coping mechanism. It's a coping mechanism to deal with an insecurity of physical connection that we can't seem to establish because we're prioritizing all kinds of other things in our lives instead of prioritizing ourselves, our needs, and the connection that we truly desire. And so the moment I did that and I worked through it, obviously the next relationship wasn't necessarily magical, but they started to work upwards, bit by bit, evolving. And in each of those relationships, I started to recognize that when I spent time working through and introspecting what my needs were, and I spent time working through and understanding what my own need was in this relationship for myself, not just with the other person, I started to attract people who were more capable of just reflecting that back to me, not giving it to me necessarily and me not depending on them, but I started to get back people, to get relationships into my life, which started to reflect back that I'm more capable of getting this myself, and therefore we're able to connect with between us on a much more authentic level, physically, emotionally, all of those things, because I'm not depending on someone, I'm not putting pressure on them, I'm not putting them under the fire to be able to achieve this, and also I'm able to give so much more of this to myself. So that's just what I wanted to talk to you, a few things about the value of time after a breakup. Now here's the important thing about the time after a breakup. Sometimes what can happen is the fear of rejection, because we've just gone through a breakup, and the fear and the pain of rejection is so heavy and it's so obvious and hard and sensitive that we now go into a shell. So we go into this space where, because we're afraid of this happening again, we're afraid of the rejection happening again, that we disconnect from wanting any sort of connection or relationship, because getting into that relationship or a connection could mean this like deathly feeling of rejection all over again. It could mean this like disastrous feeling of pain all over again. And so in that stage now, a lot of people, they go into like, there is a hermit stage, but the hermit stage, from what I've recognized, is where you actually do the inner work in that space, and you know at the end of it you're ready to move on. But a lot of people go into the isolation stage. The isolation stage is when you just cut off from it because you're like, and you get into this, it's kind of like a rage stage, where you say, fuck guys, fuck girls, fuck these people, like, fuck my family, all of them are just out to get me. And so we move almost into a bit of a victimized stage at that point, which is extremely handicapping. It doesn't allow us to actually do the introspective work, it doesn't allow us to actually do the inner work. And instead, at that point, we just sit and we start living on a lower vibration, which allows us to have so much more resentment and anger towards people around. And so it's very difficult to get out of that stage if we don't challenge ourselves, if we don't do our inner work, but then get vulnerable post that. So I saw a question here which was kind of relevant on that topic, and I think the first two questions are kind of relevant. How do you know when you are ready to move on, and how do you know you're dating properly after a breakup? Like, how do you know that that you're dating the correct person? So I'll try and answer both of these in one question. There is no fixed time after you break up to know that you're ready to move on. There's no fixed, date, time, processing. In fact, all of us process emotions differently. All of us process inner work differently. And so there's no fixed regulation being like, okay, actually take 2 months and then you should be ready to go. No, it matters. What matters is what you've done in those 2 months, how you feel at the end of the 2 months. But what I can tell you, and this is to answer the next question, becomes how do you know you're dating properly? You only know the right time when you establish what is the sense of security that I'm feeling. This is what's important. The point after the breakup is important for you to do something with it. It's important for you to take that time and make it mean something for you. So if you take that time to be able to do your inner work, you take that time to be able to work on yourself, then there comes a point where you start to feel, okay, I'm more secure now to be a little more vulnerable. I'm more secure to be able to open up more. I feel a little safer in trying to reach out and establish connection and be a little more vulnerable. And when you start to feel that, that's when you kind of know to yourself, okay, I'm feeling more secure in being able to reach out. Maybe I can start establishing getting out dating again. Now, this leads to the next question. It's very important in this stage to still observe yourself because you actually may not be fully ready. And how you know you're not fully ready is if you get hypersensitive to rejection all over again, or you get hypersensitive to a previous pattern showing up, or you get hypersensitive to the possibility of failure of the relationship becoming bigger than the chance of success. And what that means is self-sabotage, right? Like, what are the patterns you're bringing in? What are you trying to connect with people? As soon as you connect, do you immediately lay down the law? Are you trying to be vulnerable? All of those things. And so if you test it in that moment and you're sensing that you're not secure enough, this is my honest opinion, honest advice to you guys. Take a little more time. Focus a little more on your sense of internal security so that you're more at peace before you get back into dating. When I take people through the Gauntlet program, if they're not dating, I highly recommend for them to stay single in that space. If they're in relationships, it's on the opposite. I tell them this is an amazing time to use your relationship as a reflection of the things that you're going through. So the Gauntlet is our 8-week inner work program and a relationship development program. So when people go through that, I say if you're not dating, now's a good time for you to take this time just with yourself and just discover more of who you are so that you don't necessarily have the pressure or the distraction of somebody else's emotions working on what you're trying to work through. And if you're with someone, like I said, now you've already made that commitment, you're in here, use this as a space and time to be able to work through, and as a reflection of what you're going through. However, in this space, like I'm telling you guys, at the end of those 8 weeks, at the end of whatever period of time, you have to establish for yourself, do I want to take the next step and try and connect with someone? Do I want to take the next step and try and reach out? Now you do that. Coming to the next question, how do you know if you're dating the right way? There is, again, no right and wrong way to date. The only way that you know it's a success is based on what is your feeling after that attempt of connection with someone. Now, something I can tell you that I feel has happened a lot in my life, not a lot, but it's happened before in my life is, remember I told you after that moment, I felt so hurt, right? And that relationship really hurt me. I was also really afraid of rejection. I was also really afraid of trying to establish connection. So what I noticed is, even when I was attempting to date people and I met someone and I'd say, hey, do you want to go out, blah, blah, blah. Even if I initiated it, I always had one foot out the door. And so I was always looking for things that I could say to my friends, yeah, this is not going to work because she's like this. Oh, yeah, the distance. Oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And I was not willing to give myself a chance to be vulnerable, but that wasn't because the person was not necessarily worth it. It's because I was afraid of rejection all over again. I was afraid of, what if I invest so much of my life, my space, my time, and my emotions all over again, and if it just ends? What does that make it seem about me? Plus, also, I don't want to go through that pain all over again. And that's a very human tendency that we go through, where we step into this place where we're like, no, I just don't want to deal with this, so I'm going to be one foot out the door. Anytime there's conflict, I'll be like, yep, told you so, this sucked, I knew it. Anytime there's a challenge, I'll tell my friends, yeah, she's like this, blah, 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 it's not going to work. But that's because that's what I said. That's our ego, again, trying to not let us be vulnerable. So always take a moment when you're dating. One thing I can, again, add value to you for dating is that, remember, relationships are a reflection of you. The person you've attracted is a reflection of what you're feeling and what you're going through. It's not just that they're them, I'm me, and we've just met in this world. There's a magnetism that draws us to every single person that we draw, even the ones who are not good for us. Because everybody's meant to provide us some value. Every interaction that we have with human beings provides us something about ourselves. And so if you've attracted this person, even that you're dating, whether it's online, whatever else, if you've decided to establish connection with them, but you're feeling uncomfortable, ask yourself, what is in the discomfort? Is it rejection? Is it a fear of vulnerability? Is it a fear of making connection again? Is it a fear of being used? Is it a fear of using? Is it a fear of not being able to control ourselves and stepping into like coping mechanisms like cheating, other addictions? What is in this space that I'm afraid of stepping into? But you have to take this time with yourself to do it a little bit. Because if you rely on the other person to take you through it, you're going to start depending on them to now regulate you. You're going to start depending on them to provide you these reflections. And so instead, take this time just with yourself, reflect on it, and then what happens out of it is that you get a much better perspective for yourself and says, maybe I am just afraid of being vulnerable. Maybe I am just afraid of like the rejection aspect. And so with that, any of those feelings that you're feeling, always come back to giving your inner child and yourself a little love and security. Why is it so important? I sound like a stuck tape recorder when I tell people internal security is always important. Give yourself internal security, most important thing. But it's because that helps you make better decisions for yourself. If you feel more grounded, more at peace and safer within who you are, the chances of you picking what's actually good for you becomes so much higher, right? So if I gave you, like, let's say I gave you a bunch of money, or I gave you a bunch of food rather, and then I took you, so you've eaten, now you're full, you're feeling a little better, and then I take you to a buffet at like some shitty restaurant where you know food is not good at all. Are you gonna like indulge in that? Or are you gonna be like, I think I can do better than this, and I'm feeling good, I'm kind of full right now, I'm good. You'll say, no, I'm not gonna dive into the bullshit food, right? Because you know what you can handle and what you're willing to handle in stomach. And that's what's important about if we can create that sense of internal security for ourselves, then we don't need to create that external dependency on it. We don't need to think that someone else needs to fill up our fuel sources. So coming back to that question of, okay, what do I do? How do I know I'm dating the right person? Keep reflecting back as to how you feel with it. Is it challenging? If it's challenging, it's good. But is it breaking down your internal security? Do you feel worse than if you felt better than if you were with that person, right? Those are important questions to ask yourself. And again, another good thing is to notice where the ego is trying to play a part. Because like I said, as in the case with me, the ego steps in to mask how we're feeling sometimes and says, no, this person's not good for you, no, this. And then it keeps wanting to move from person to person to person, never actually meeting success. So sometimes you have to make yourself ready. You have to, if you're in that process and you're trying it, you have to take a bigger plunge of vulnerability. You have to take a bigger plunge of trust. But you must do it while you're simultaneously working on yourself and your own internal security. Because if you don't do that, then I can tell you with surety that the decisions that you will be making in terms of the person, the situation, the people, the energy that you attract will not necessarily reflect what you deserve for yourself. They won't necessarily reflect the happiness, the connection, and those things that you really deserve for yourself. Make sure that when you come out of a breakup or even an end of any kind of relationship, right? Like whatever it is, even with your family, even with anything else, take that time to be able to just establish for yourself, like, okay, what does this relationship mean to me? What has it been doing for me? What is it like, what value am I getting from it? And why do I feel so triggered by it? And I think all of that will actually help you have, all of that will actually help you be able to better establish what your connection is for yourself. It'll help you better establish, even, like I said, even relationships with parents. This is a big one where after a relationship with parents, we're like, I don't want to talk to my mom anymore. I'm blocking her, not talking to her for like months. Ask yourself why it is that you were getting so triggered. Ask yourself why it is that it was like pulling on your heartstrings so much. And if you're able to do that, you actually may get a certain piece of insight into what it is that you really want from your mom, that because she's not able to give you, you're feeling really triggered and bothered by. This is another case of what someone was sharing with me today, was that they found that in their relationship with their partner keeps getting triggered, and their partner keeps getting bothered by, when they spend time with like their friends, everybody else. And so the partner says, go spend time with them, go do that, you don't prioritize me, etc. And I started taking this, this person through it. She was on my program, and I started to, sorry, I'm just blocking some unnecessary comments, as you can imagine. And I started to take her through this process. And I said, maybe it's just that your partner, who's a man, really just wants to be able to connect with you and ask you for time. But his own conditioning and the way he's been shamed around asking for things and asking for emotional connection, maybe that just prevents him from being able to ask you safely. Maybe that just prevents it from him being able to ask you vulnerably. And because of that, he, with his conditioning and his shame, instead he wants to push it onto you and say, you're the one who does this, you're not doing it, blah, blah, blah. That's projection, right? Projection is our inability to safely express our insecurities. And so we put that blame onto someone else. But maybe all he wants is a little bit of love. Maybe all he wants is a hug. Now, it's not necessarily your responsibility to have to give it to him. But if you prioritize the relationship more than you prioritize being right, or more than you prioritize being, and him being wrong or proving a point, then maybe this is a perfect opportunity for you to be able to establish like beautiful connection with you and realize the value of your relationship, using a challenging moment where his ego is showing up to actually create a beautiful like flower of connection through it. So use the same principle with your families, with everybody else. Take that time for you to reflect. Reflection and introspection are amongst the most powerful things for us creating a better life for ourselves.